Good morning. It's great to be with you again for this second lecture in the series of 3. And today we're looking at the history of Messianic Jews. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation on my screen with you. We will have 2 sessions of about 30 minutes each with a time for pause. And I do hope that you'll come back to me with some comments and questions. And my email is on the PowerPoint slides, and also you can contact me in other ways on my website and also on my YouTube channel called Jew in the Pew. So today we are looking at the history of Messianic Jews. Last session I shared my own personal story, how I became a Jewish disciple of Yeshua, of Jesus, and today we are looking at something of the history of Messianic Jews, and then in the third lecture we will look at their theology and their beliefs. When we look at the history of Messianic Jews, we of course have to look at the 2 major faith communities of Jews and Christians, because Jewish Christians are both Jewish and Christian. You get the best of both worlds. You get Saturdays off and Sundays. That's a joke, by the way. You get 8 days of Hanukkah presents at the Feast of Hanukkah, and you get Christmas presents. But you also have double the headaches because you're part of the sad and often difficult and painful history between 2 major world religions and faith communities, the Jewish community and the Christian community. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is to divide up the material into a discussion of our terminology that we use, and then look at these major periods in the history of Jewish Christianity, the New Testament period, the Church Fathers, the Middle Ages, the Reformation, the modern period, and then since the time of the formation of the State of Israel and the Holocaust, and then come to some general conclusions and observations. The book by Hugh Schoenfield, written in the 1930s, is called The History of Jewish Christianity. It's probably one of the few books written that really traces the history of Jewish disciples of Jesus throughout the centuries, but there are many other detailed studies of Jewish disciples of Jesus in different periods. For example, I have the book somewhere. I will show it you later on the history of Jewish disciples of Jesus in the biblical and apostolic times. Let me first of all just define our terms a bit more clearly. You have probably already discussed this, but even the name Israel and Jew is often under discussion because it means different things to different people at different times. Of course, in the Bible, particularly the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, the term used is Hebrew, which is from a Hebrew root avar, which means to cross over, just as Abraham crossed over from Mesopotamia, from Ur in the Chaldees, into the land of Canaan. And it not only signifies crossing over geographically, but also crossing over spiritually from the worship of pagan gods to the worship of the one true God. Now, the name Israel, of course, is the name that is given to Jacob in the book of Genesis after he wrestles with the angel at Peniel. And there are different ways of translating the name. Nobody is quite sure how to translate it. Ish Sa'el, the man who is a prince with God. Ish Ra'el, the man who sees God. Ish Tsara'el, the man who struggles with God. Or most likely, but we can't be 100% certain, Ish Yasha'el, the man who is righteous with God. And Israel becomes the name in the Old Testament for the 10 northern tribes in the land of Israel, and Judah is the name for the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin. But often the biblical writers employ a device called pars pro toto, the part representing the whole. So both Israel and Judah can represent the whole of the Jewish people. Israel today is, of course, the modern state of Israel, and an Israeli is a modern citizen of the modern state of Israel. And then the term Jew, which is translated really from the French and the German, Juif and Juda, comes to be in English Jew, originates from the tribe of Judah, the son of Jacob, named Judah or Yehudah, meaning praise. But even this word Jew is then not very common in the Old Testament, but is the normal word in the New Testament for a citizen of Israel, Judaios in the Greek. And Judaios, Iudaios, also can mean a citizen not just of Israel, but a Judean, someone who lives in the southern kingdom, particularly in Jerusalem, part of the institution and the authorities in Jerusalem. So the Judaioi are sometimes contrasted with the Galileans who live in the north. Now, today, Jewish is more ethnic and cultural identity. It's about our people and our culture. But in the time of the New Testament, Judaios is more a religious identity, that not only are you from the tribe of Judah or from the province of Judea, but you are opposed to not Christianity, but Hellenismos, Hellenism, the culture and the language and the civilization of the Greeks. So in the Old Testament, Judaios is contrasted with Hellenos, Jew and Greek. And it's only in about the 4th or 5th century after the time of Christ that Jew is contrasted with the term Christian. In the Old Testament, a Judean was therefore a member of the tribe of Judah, of the province of Judah, or somebody from Jerusalem. And the word Judaismos is used in a couple of times in the Old Testament, not often, and a few times in the writings of Paul, to express the religion of Judaism, of the Judahites. But it is never contrasted with Christianity until after the time of the Bible. And Paul himself writes in Philippians that he was more advanced in Judaismos, in Judaism, than any of his opponents. The word Shem, Semite, is also used. It's an ancestor of the line of Shem through Aber and then through Terah and Nahor and Abraham. So the Semites or Shemites are not only the Jews descended through Isaac, but also the Arabs descended through Esau and then through Ishmael. So Semite is a general term for any Semitic person, but in modern language it's used as Jewish, because the term anti-Semitism is normally meaning anti-Jewish. Now, who is a Jew? I expect you've discussed this already. There are several definitions. The definition of Orthodox Jews is anyone who has a Jewish mother or has converted to Judaism, which for a man involves circumcision, and for a woman and a man a ritual bath and immersion, and when the temple was still standing, sacrifice offered in the temple. So the Orthodox definition says, and this is a reference from the Talmud, thy son by an Israelite woman is called thy son, but thy son by a heathen woman is not called thy son. Now, Reform Jews, and there are more Reform Jews in America than there are Orthodox Jews, say it doesn't matter if it is your father is Jewish or your mother is Jewish. And in the Bible, Jewish descent goes through the father quite often. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the founding fathers of the state of the Jewish people, and their children are counted as Jewish. It's a very complicated subject. I'm not going to go more deeply into this because we want to look at Messianic Jews, those who claim to be disciples of Jesus and are Jews. I wish I could have time to spend talking about the history of the Jewish people, because if we want to understand the history of Messianic Jews, we have to know quite well the history of our people. And here is one chart which shows you on just one page the complete history of the Jewish people from about 3,000 years before Jesus to the present day. And if you go on the website www.odyeda.com, you can not only download this chart, but there are little guides to every event if you run your cursor on your web browser onto this. But I don't have time to say that the history of the Jewish people is vital to our understanding of the history of Messianic Jews, especially because Messianic Jews are caught in between the Jewish community and the Christian community, and they both connect the two. We are the missing link between Judaism and Christianity, but they are also the barrier. And when Jews and Christians are not being nice to each other, persecuting each other, denigrating each other, Jewish disciples of Jesus are caught in the middle. Now I'm going to just carry on with my definitions for a moment, but there is some other information in the slides about the cultural and the historic and the numbers of Jewish people, and talk about ourselves, myself as a Jewish disciple of Jesus. And although these terms seem quite similar, they are actually quite important to know, understand the reasons why we use different terms for the same things. So I am a Messianic Jew, a Jewish disciple of the Messiah, Jesus. In fact, most Jews, if they are religious, are waiting for the Messiah to come. They don't believe it's Jesus, but they're still waiting for the Messiah. So in one sense, all Jews could be called Messianic. But in the modern times, since the 1950s and 60s, the term Messianic Jew has been particularly used of myself and others who are Jews who believe that Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, is the Messiah. Another term that is used to describe us is Jewish Christian. Now, the slight difference is that instead of Jew being the key word, the word is Christian. And in previous centuries, Jewish Christian was more popular because it said, I'm a Christian who happens to be Jewish. My faith is in Jesus, but my race is Jewish. And the Christian identity became the primary one, and Jewish was more a cultural and ethnic identity. And similar to this term, Jewish Christian, was the term used around 150 years ago when the Hebrew Christian Alliance was formed, and they called themselves Hebrew Christians. Now, why Hebrew and not Jewish? Because for them, Jewish was the religion, and they wanted to say, we're not religiously Jewish. We believe that only in Christ can we be saved by grace through faith, and not by keeping the religion of Judaism. So they gave themselves a more cultural identity of being Hebrew. Not just that they may have known Hebrew or spoken Hebrew, but that they had a Hebrew flavor in their culture and their nationality, but not their religion. Now, when scholars write about the New Testament and the Jewish disciples of Jesus in, for example, the Gospel of Matthew, in Paul's letter to the Romans, in the book of James, in the book of Hebrews, they often use the phrase Christian Jews. And that again puts the emphasis on the word Jew, but gives them the adjective Christian. Now, for scholars, this is okay, but for people like myself, Messianic Jews, we're a bit concerned about the word Christian, because most people don't understand that the word Christian for Jewish ears means someone who has persecuted our people. So I think that the term Christian Jew is not a very popular one amongst Messianic Jews today, but certainly amongst scholars of the New Testament, Christian Jew is a common use. In the New Testament, they are also called Nazarenes, or followers of the way. And these terms do not say they're Jewish or they're Christian, but of course the Nazarenes, because they follow Jesus of Nazareth, and because of the prophecy about the Netzah, the root coming out of dry ground in the book of Isaiah. And then in the early church writings of Hegesippus, Eusebius, and others, they refer to them as Nazareans, followers of the Nazarene, or maybe from Nazareth, or maybe followers of the branch of David, the root that came from Jesse. And the term Judeo-Christian is used as a way of describing people who are both Jewish and Christian. It's another term. And then the general term Christian. Now, for Jewish people, Christian means anyone who has the name Christian, whether they are a genuine follower of Jesus, whether they have genuine faith or not. So even the people who persecuted the Jewish people in the name of Christ, the Crusaders, the Spanish Inquisition, even those who were in the Holocaust, the genocide of 6 million people, they are called Christians. You may say, but they weren't truly disciples of Jesus. I would agree. But for Jewish people, that is who they are. Now, I've discussed the terminology because I hope it helps you understand how when we look at the history of Messianic Jews, Jewish disciples of Jesus, we can see that there's lots of different angles that are used to view the phenomenon. So I'm now going to go into my different periods of the history. And the first period is the infancy of the church, the infancy of Jewish Christianity as well, because from the years 0 to 32, when Jesus was alive, his followers were Jewish. They worshipped in synagogue, they worshipped in the temple, they kept the Sabbath, they kept the Jewish food laws, and just like Jesus, they were seen within the Jewish community, maybe as a sect, an odd group with strange beliefs and a strange rabbi who had strange teachings, but they were not seen as Christians because Christians didn't exist. And then in the year 32, roughly, when Jesus has died on the cross and risen from the dead, we have him sending out his disciples, who are all Jews, to make disciples of all nations. And this is where the Great Commission changes the nature of the people of God. So they are not just Jews who believe in Jesus, but even the nations, the Romans, the Greeks, the Scythians, the Persians. Anyone now can believe in Yeshua, in Jesus. The focus of the early church up until around the year 120 is still with the 14 Jewish bishops of Jerusalem, the church in Rome, the church in Antioch, the church in Spain, the church in the ancient world is growing around the Greco-Roman Empire. but the focus is still on what is happening in Jerusalem. And the church historian Eusebius writes and gives the details of 14 Jewish bishops in Jerusalem, from James, the brother of Jesus, up until the last one. Also, we should see that within the Jewish community, the Jews who believe in Jesus are still part of that community. I will discuss that in a little while. But they are also spreading the message of Jesus to the Greco-Roman world. And the church in Rome and the church in Antioch and the church in Greece are growing. And by around the year 150, it is unusual to have Jews who believe in Jesus. The majority of Christians are not Jewish. And Justin Martyr, one of the early church fathers, writes in his dialogue with Trypho. Trypho is a Jewish rabbi, that he knows that there are some Jews who still believe in Jesus and still keep the food laws, the laws of the Pentateuch, the kosher laws, the laws about the Sabbath, but he doesn't really approve of them. He knows they exist, but in his view, that's not the mainstream of Christianity. Now, this story is told in the book of Eusebius, the church history, and he reports on a Palestinian Christian who may have been Jewish, but probably was not, called Hegesippus. And he talks about these first followers of Jesus who are Jewish, continuing, and he gives them another name. He calls them Ebionites. Ebion is from the Hebrew word meaning poor. And these Ebionites are seen to be poor, perhaps because they were living in Jerusalem and there was poverty. You remember Paul in the book of Romans takes up a collection for the poor in Jerusalem, but probably because he saw them as poor in their faith and in their doctrine. He says that some of them did not really believe that Jesus was truly God, truly divine, but rather a special human being. And he also thinks that they were poor in their faith because they did not believe that you could be saved just by believing in Jesus. They thought that you had to keep the law. And of course, this is one of the heresies in the early church. It's called Ebionitism. And sadly, I don't think this is completely true, but this is what Epiphanius and others wrote against these people who he called the Ebionites. I think he misunderstood them, but he certainly saw them as a danger to the church because they were Jews who were still keeping the Torah, the law of the Hebrew Bible, and they believed in Jesus. Now, Origen in the year 230 debates with rabbis and he debates with Jewish Christians in Caesarea. And right down through the centuries, there are Jews who believe in Jesus who are helping Jerome, who translated the Hebrew and the Greek Bible into Latin, the Vulgate translation that we have. He was assisted by Jewish Christians, Jews who knew Jesus and Jews who understood Hebrew in their translation. And right down through the centuries, we have evidence of what we call Jewish Christian groups, especially in the East, in Asia, influencing the Syriac church, the church based in Antioch and in Persia, and also influencing the formation of Islam, because it's very likely that Muhammad was influenced not just by some Christians called Nestorian Christians, but also by Jewish Christians in some of their teaching. Now I'm going to continue by just talking about the differences between Judaism and Christianity, and when the two groups separated and became two different religions and two different communities. The traditional view, which James Parks and Marcel Simon and James Dunn have supported, is that between the years 70 to 135 AD, the church and the Jewish people underwent a split. And this is because in the year 70, the temple was destroyed by Vespasian, the Roman emperor, and the sacrifices had to cease. And in the year 135, the Bar Kokhba revolt formally ended the independence of the Jewish people. But new understandings emerged, and Daniel Boyarin and Paula Fredrickson and others in the book The Ways That Never Parted said that actually there was no quick split between Judaism and Christianity. And this has significance because today I would say that if you understand it correctly, Judaism and Christianity should not be seen as two separate religions. There is only one God, the God of Israel, who sent his son, the Messiah, Jesus, to be the Messiah of Israel and Savior of all the world. And so the identities of Jews and Christians were a later invention after the time of the New Testament, when it was necessary to separate these two. The traditional view is that between 70 and 135 and the destruction of the temple, the Jewish Christians were isolated from the rest of the Jewish people and had to choose whether they were part of the whole church or not. And in the year around 90 of the Common Era, according to the Talmud, there is a prayer that is put in the Jewish prayer book in the synagogue called the Birkat Haminim, the blessing of heretics. And in reality, this is not a blessing but a curse. It says, may those be cursed who are heretics and sectarians, and may they have no share in the people of Israel or the world to come. And it was thought that if there was a Jew who believed in Jesus in the synagogue service, they would not say this prayer because they were bringing the curse upon themselves. So this prayer, the Birkat Haminim, was introduced in the synagogue by a rabbi called Samuel the Small to make Jews who believed in Jesus leave the synagogue. That is a traditional view, but it's likely that they still were in the Jewish community. And when Jerusalem became a Roman city in the year 70, its name was changed to Aelia Capitolina, the eagles of the capital, the symbol of the Roman legions. According to the church historian Eusebius, the Jews who believed in Jesus were given a vision to flee the city before the Romans destroyed it. And they fled across the river Jordan to a place called Pella, which is just north of the Sea of the Dead Sea. And they then were saved from the massacre of Jerusalem by the Roman emperor, but they were isolated and separate from the rest of the Jewish people. Now I'm going to pause there. I hope you have some questions and comments to discuss in your break, and we will resume in a few minutes' time. Thank you for your attention.